Hi everyone, my name is Anton Pelcher. I'm an engineer and I've been constructing fish farms for over 10 years. Today we're going to focus on the 11 essential tricky issues on how to properly design a RAS facility for farming sturgeon. Make sure you watch this video to the end, because after watching it, you won't make any mistakes when planning your own sturgeon farm. And we'll start with the species of sturgeon, because it's important to sort that out. In fact, what species of sturgeon are we talking about? You can also see the in-depth video, in which I will give you detailed description of sturgeon species, their characteristics and growing parameters. Now I'm going to make it very short. Generally speaking, there are lots of sturgeon species. Moreover, there are native species in each habitat, but nevertheless, not all of them are farmed in RAS. Why? Firstly, their fertilized eggs for fry are not available everywhere. Not all of them are, so to say, technologically advanced, which means that not all of them can be farmed efficiently, with the guarantee of a good growth rate and a high survival rate. So, from the main species, pure species, these are undoubtedly Sterlet, which is the smallest species of sturgeon. Beluga, on the contrary, the largest one. Siberian sturgeon, those who live in Russia also know it as a Lena sturgeon. And its subspecies. And then there are a few others. As far as hybrids are concerned, it's Besta, a hybrid of the beluga and the starlet, and the Russian Lena sturgeon. These are two main hybrids that are most widespread at fish farms, at least in Russia and the CIS countries. In general, all these sturgeon species that I have listed have the same farming requirements in regards to water temperature, stocking density, and so on. In general, we can state the fact that we can apply approximately the same standards when growing these species. Well, let's take for example the starred sturgeon, which is grown in warmer water than all other sturgeon species, at 26 degrees Celsius. There is also paddlefish, which is a special type of sturgeon, and those who are familiar with it, specialist fishermen, will certainly tell a lot about its special aspects. So those species of sturgeon which are listed are the most technologically advanced for growing in RAS. They have the best survival rate, the highest growth rate, relatively low feeding ratio, which allows to use feed efficiently, and in general, there is always high demand for them on the market in my country. Although in principle, there is a demand for all types of sturgeon if they are grown properly so that their high quality is guaranteed. But nevertheless, the species that are enumerated are most commonly farmed as they provide for good margin and high profitability. But sure, you should analyze the situation in your country. And before we go further to the main tricks, let's identify the basic growing parameters. And we will start with the temperature. In general, sturgeons live in water with the temperature from 0 to 30 degrees Celsius, quite a wide range. But the optimum farming temperature for all the species I have listed is 22-24 degrees. Why? Because it's at this temperature that they have the best possible growth parameters. Ammonia. The maximum ammonia concentration for sturgeon is 1.5 mg per liter for fingerlings and 2-3 mg per liter for grow-out fish. These are the maximum parameters of ammonia that you need to maintain in RAS. And at pH level of 7 to 7.5, not more than 7.5, because the higher the pH is, the more toxic the ammonia contained in the water becomes. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, should be 15 mg per liter. This is the maximum for sturgeon fry, and 25 mg per liter for grow-out fish. Any higher concentrations are already uncomfortable for sturgeons. Nitrites are NO2. The maximum nitrate values for fry are 0.3–0.5 mg per liter. For grow-out fish, they are higher, 1 to 1.5 mg per liter. This is the maximum for farming sturgeons in RAS. Oxygen. The minimum oxygen concentration is 8 mg per liter for fry and 7 mg per liter for grow-out fish. Of course, the sturgeon will still live with lower oxygen concentrations dissolved in the water, but these will already be uncomfortable conditions, which will result in lower growth rate, so the lower limit is 8 mg per liter for fry and 7 for grow-out fish. Nitrates. Well, they are much less toxic than ammonia, nitrogen, and nitrites. They are the products of water treatment by bacteria in the biofilter. Nitrates accumulate in the system and can be removed only with flushing, unless, of course, denitrification is provided for. The normal value for fry is 50–100 mg per liter. For grow-out fish, it's 200 mg per liter. In general, when these parameters are exceeded, fish also become stressed and it grows slower. So it's recommended to maintain normal levels of nitrates in accordance with the figures which I have just provided. Feed conversion ratio. What is it? It's the amount of feed eaten by the fish per 1 kilogram of weight gain. So for sturgeon, when farming to grow out weight, the average feeding ratio is 1.3-1.4. What does this mean? It means that in order to gain 1 kilogram of weight, the sturgeon needs to eat 1,300-1,400 grams of feed. This is a normal conversion ratio when using high-quality feed for RAS farming. Naturally, these coefficients are different for broodstock and fry, and we're now talking about grow-out fish only. Feed. Sturgeons only eat high-quality extruded feed, specially developed for farming this particular type of fish in RAS. And I have already told about feeds in a separate video, which you can see via the link. It's the video dedicated to feed. There are world-known fish feed manufacturers. All of them have representative offices in various countries. For example, Coppens, Aller Aqua, Biomar, Ratio Aqua, Scretin, well, and some other brands. Stocking material. Basically, there are two options, and it's the same for all fish species. The first one is fertilized eggs. Either get your own or buy fertilized eggs from a supplier, incubate them, get larvae, grow it to fry, and further ungrow to grow out fish. Or purchase fry at special fry farms and grow it to a grow out weight. In other words, there are two basic options in regards to stocking material, which are possible practically everywhere. Survival rate. Survival rate varies at different stages, so the first stage is incubation. The normal survival rate is 80–85%, which is the difference between the amount of larvae hatched and the amount of fertilized eggs laid into incubators. I will say right away, experienced fish farmers using high-quality stocking material can obtain the rate of 90–95%. The next stage is larva holding, rising it to float, transferring to dry feed. Probably at this stage, the rate makes another 85%. This is also the survival rate. That is, other 15% are the waste from what is left. And the third stage, while ungrowing larvae to fry, it makes another 85%. Thus you get 15% more waste. And we get the last 10% loss when farming from fry to grow out fish. As you see, the main waste is during the incubation and growing fry. That is, during farming fry to grow out fish, if your initial stocking material is fry, your loss is minimal and doesn't exceed 10%. Maturation to broodstock period. There is, of course, a certain time period from fry to broodstock when sturgeons mature to spawn. It depends on the species. So, the stolid is the fastest. It matures in 2.5–3 years. Others, let's call them so, major species, Siberian and Russian sturgeons, are hybrids and they mature in 4–6 years. I'm talking now solely about farming in RAS, not in open water bodies. And the longest maturation period had the beluga. Even in RAS conditions, it matures from 8 to 10 years before the first fertilized eggs may be obtained. So the stolid matures to spawn in 2.5–3 years. It's the species of sturgeon that matures the fastest. And in RAS, the stolid spawns every 6 months. So in general, it's probably the species to start with if you're planning your own sturgeon farm for caviar. The main sturgeon species are the Siberian sturgeon, the Russian sturgeon and various hybrids like the Bester, which mature in RAS during 4–6 years and spawn every 1–1.5 years, unless of course the caviar is obtained by the lifetime method. Well, and the last species that differs from all the rest is the beluga. It takes beluga the longest period of time to spawn, even in RAS conditions. It's at least 7 to 10 years, and it spawns every 3 years. And by the way, regarding the question whether it's profitable to farm beluga for caviar at all, setting up a RAS farm for beluga, I will answer. As the major sturgeon species give fertilized eggs once a year, beluga does every 3 years. It means that in order to get the same amount of caviar, you need to farm 3 times larger beluga broodstock than that of other species. And the broodstock requires 3 times more feed, 3 times more volume of fish tanks, and so on. All in all, you have to understand, beluga farming for caviar is a very specific story, and you should carefully consider all pros and cons long before setting up such a farm. Of course, it's possible to sell the caviar under a super premium brand and make up for your losses through a high price, but bear in mind that it's long and costly. Sturgeon growth rate. I will focus on the main milestones. Incubation of sturgeon fertilized eggs takes about 1 week. Thus you will get the larvae in 7 days from the moment of laying the fertilized eggs into incubators. The next stage lasts for 2.5–3 months, and during this period you obtain fingerlings of about 10 grams. So it takes 2.5–3 months to grow 10 grams fingerlings from larva. Further, the sturgeon grows for another 5 months, from 10 grams to 0.5 kilograms, from 500 grams to 1.5 kilograms. The sturgeon grows another 5.56 months, and from 1.5 to 3 kilograms it grows during another 5 months. Now let's summarize all that and understand how long it will take us to farm a sturgeon of 3 kilograms. On average, we need a year and a half to farm a sturgeon from fertilized eggs to 3 kilograms weight. Well, 18-19 months in RAS conditions. I will say straightly, in practice it's often faster, because good farming conditions, high quality feed, optimal temperature result in faster fish growth. It can be done faster, but if you want to base your calculations on the standard average figures, you better take the ones that I provided. Well, here we are, finally moving on to the design tips for Sturgeon RAS farms. And the first one is that sturgeon is so-called bottom fish, and many people know it. This means that even if you hold it in a very deep tank, as many of us want to, the sturgeon will still only occupy the bottom part of it. So the first rule is the following: don't design tanks deeper than 1 meter. It will simply be useless, because the sturgeon will occupy the bottom part anyway. Another few meters will be just useless and doom you to high expenses for water supply and heating. You might have already noticed, the tanks are usually 1.20–1.30 meters deep, so that there are 20–30 centimeters of dry area and a meter of water depth. Yes, for larvae and juveniles, these numbers are even lower. For larvae, I recommend 20–30 centimeters. For juveniles, 50–70 centimeters water depth. This is enough. Because of this, a sturgeon farm often takes a lot more area than, for example, a trout farm, where you can keep a high stocking density, make deeper tanks. Unfortunately, this is not possible on sturgeon. There is no way around it, so you have to adapt to these peculiar characteristics of the fish and design tanks which are less in height. Tip 2 follows from the first one. The sturgeon stocking density is not calculated per cubic meters, but per square meters. I think the specialists who are knowledgeable in this subject will now confirm my words. Indeed, the sturgeon stocking density is counted by the standards per square meter. So consider that regardless of your water depth, you should calculate the stocking density at your farm based on the area of the tanks. The third one, already more tricky. Sturgeon feces are very floatable. Why do you even need to know this information? Let me explain. You need to clean water from sturgeon feces and install mechanical treatment units. Based on the fact that they are very floatable, it's practically useless to put any settling tanks for them. Of course, they will have some efficiency, but based on the experience, we have already realized that it's still not necessary to provide for settling tanks, because they will collect some of the sediment, but far from all. So the drains from the tanks should flow directly to the drum filter, and it's the most optimal mechanical water treatment unit on sturgeon farms. Fourth, degassing. It's an eternal debate whether degassing is necessary on sturgeons or not. I'm telling you from personal experience, it's not obligatory. Why not? Because firstly, the maximum stocking density is up to 70 kilograms per square meter. That's not very much. Secondly, sturgeon is quite tolerant to carbon dioxide. If you have a moving bed biofilter with a good aeration, then the degassing unit just becomes an unnecessary one. So, by and large, yes, it certainly reduces the CO2 concentration in the water, but it doesn't affect the whole growing process and growth rate. So, degassing at a RAS sturgeon farm is optional. In my practice, I have never encountered such a case when sturgeons suffered from excessive carbon dioxide in the system. I'm not talking about incubation units where it's necessary to blow off water from nitrogen, and I don't mention any specific cases now. I'm talking about standard grow-out sturgeon farming in RAS. The answer is that, in general, it's not necessary, and I never suggest installing this unit, because till present moment no such situation has occurred when it would be a problem, by contrast with RAS farms for trout. If I'm wrong, and you've encountered such cases when degassing was indispensable, write it in the comments, as I'm very interested to know your opinion. Fifth, the calculation of a RAS farm for growing sturgeons for caviar is very different from that of grow-out fish farm, in terms of the production plan and other aspects. Why? In fact, I've often been asked questions like, well, Anton, we will farm 50 tons of sturgeon per year, but how much caviar will we get? The answer is no caviar at all, because if you farm exclusively grow-out fish, all your tanks will be occupied with grow-out fish, and you will let sturgeons for sale when they reach the age of no more than a year and a half. And if you grow fish for caviar, then you need to keep it in the separate tanks for 5, 6, 7 and even 10 years, meaning that there will be only broodstock held in these tanks, and you will no longer be able to farm grow-out fish there. So, of course, you can combine, and there are all kinds of different nuances. Now I will not go in detail, but it's important that you understand that there is a RAS farm for farming grow-out fish and there is a separate system for growing fish for caviar. These are different parameters, different blocks. Thus all the calculations are also made separately for both departments. Well, to make it clearer, I will give you an example. Here we have 50 tons of fish. This is a Sturgeon RAS farm, which contains several fish holding tanks. For instance, we want to get caviar, and we remove all grow-out fish from the tanks, using these tanks for the broodstock only, and thus we can get about 1.5 tons of sturgeon caviar per year. Either we can get 50 tons of grow-out fish, or we get 1.5 tons of caviar, or we separate in halves, for example partly grow-out fish and partly broodstock, and get, for example, 25 tons of grow-out fish and 750 kilograms of caviar. This is a clear example that illustrates that the tanks in the system are either occupied with grow-out fish or with the broodstock. Sixth, there are two methods of producing sturgeon caviar. They're the lifetime method and the slaughter method. What is the trick with the lifetime method? It's that we get fertilized eggs several times. That is, we create special conditions. The fertilized eggs mature so that we can draw them from the fish, and we return the fish back into the system. The slaughter method, naturally, it's understandable from the method name. We kill the fish immediately, which means that each female gives us fertilized eggs only once in its life. What's the fundamental difference? Well, somewhere the slaughtered fish caviar is valued more. This is true, and often its price is higher, but as we only get the fertilized eggs from females once in a lifetime, we need to keep about twice as much broodstock compared to the lifetime method. Therefore, in general, it's usually economically advantageous and cost-effective to get fertilized eggs by lifetime method. And by the way, we usually mix the two. Thus twice we get the caviar from the female by the milking method, and the third time we slaughter it. And by the way, the second and the third time, the female gives more fertilized eggs. Thus at the time of slaughtering, it already gives up to 20% of its weight. In this way, these two methods are crossed, mixed, and it's a rather effective approach to organizing a fish farm for sturgeon caviar. 7. You can get fertilized eggs from the fish in ascending order. If at the first spawning, on average, a fish gives 10%, then at the second spawning it already gives 15%, and at the third this percentage goes up to 20%. So if you farm fish and get fertilized eggs by the lifetime method, the results are much higher compared to the second method when you immediately slaughter the female. But there is a reverse mechanism. It's impossible to increase the amount of obtained fertilized eggs to infinity. After the third, the fifth time, that is 20, maximum 25%, the female reaches its peak and can't give more, so the quantity of fertilized eggs starts to decline. But it's rather not the decline in quantity. The females can at some point simply not give the eggs, not get matured enough. There may be a number of tracks, so usually experienced fish farmers take a look at the female and decide whether they can still milk it or it's time to slaughter it. So keep in mind that sturgeons don't spawn in a linear mode, but increasingly. 8th, to set up a farm for caviar. In order for the sturgeon to give caviar using lifetime method, you need to keep it in cold water for 2 months. What's that for? It's a trick, and actually it happens in the natural conditions. Only when you simulate this process in RAS, it's a little bit compressed in time. You lower the water temperature to 4-6 degrees, keep the female there for 2 months without feeding, then smoothly raise the temperature and you can get fertilized eggs. Naturally, this process has its own tips that fish farmers know very well about hormones and so on. But nevertheless, it takes 3 months for this process to take place. You gradually decrease the temperature during 2 weeks. Then you keep the females in the cold water for 2 months. And it takes other 2 weeks to gradually increase the temperature up to normal level. Thus, in order to spawn using this method, the sturgeon must be held for 3 months in a separate department and without feeding. 9th, tanks parameters. For sturgeons, in addition to depth, some other requirements must be met in order for the farm to be efficient and the tanks to provide for optimal fish stocking conditions. Well, level tanks or trays are usually rectangular, 3-4 meters long, up to a meter wide, and half a meter deep. There you keep and grow lava, then you transfer it to the fry tanks. For example, these are round tanks. Their diameter is optimal, and it's from 2 to 3.5 meters, and the depth, including dry area, is 1 meter maximum, or better 75 centimeters. Then it's still more convenient to perform various manipulations with fingerlings. As for the grow-out fish tanks, As I mentioned earlier, water depth should be equal to 1 meter. So if we take the depth of 1 meter, what should be the diameter of these tanks? Let me answer you. The maximum diameter is 8 meters, and I won't recommend to take the diameter less than 3 meters for grow-out fish. That's from 3 to 8 meters. Why shouldn't they be more than 8 meters in diameter? The answer is because in the case of a larger diameter and violating diameter depth ratio, the hydraulics, the movement of water inside the tanks, is disturbed. So dirt and suspended solids are no longer effectively removed from the tank. It starts to stagnate at the bottom and the whole process is disrupted. Of course, it's not very critical, but you will have to constantly clean these tanks. So it's recommended to make tanks for sturgeons no larger than 8 meters in diameter. The 10th. How a sturgeon fertilized eggs incubated. There is a special unit named the Sturgeon Incubator, so it was developed, as you can see from its name, specially for the incubation of sturgeon species. Well, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many fish farmers, this is the best option, the best technique for sturgeon fertilized eggs incubation. I will give you detailed information about this unit in one of the coming videos, so we will not dwell on it now. And by the way, many fish farmers, especially sturgeon farmers, successfully incubate sturgeons in a vase incubator. Of course, it has its own specifics, but in general, sturgeon cover incubation in vase is also possible and quite widely used. 11th. Grow-out fish weight. Unless there is a serious need for growing a really large sturgeon of 3 kilograms or more, the recommended grow-out weight for sale is between 1.5 and 3 kilograms. Why exactly that? Frankly, anything less than 1.5 kilograms is not a fish, but just the head and the tail. There won't be high demand for it, except for stolid, which can be cooked and eaten starting from a portion of 300 grams. The minimum weight at which sturgeon will be in demand is usually 1.5 kilograms. Well, and the maximum is 3. Why not more? It's very simple, because the more the weight of sturgeon is, and in principle it applies to any fish, the more feed it consumes per kilogram of weight gain. Thus the feed conversion ratio increases, and you also have to keep this fish longer in the tanks. Thus you can't transfer fingerlings there, because the tanks are occupied with grow-out fish. So farm capacity goes down, the feed conversion ratio goes up, and in general your economics drops down if you overhaul grow-out fish and for too long. I'm not talking about those cases when the fish is farmed on a specific order from a large company. This fish is specially raised for such specific cases, but if you sell it as standard typical market, it should be from 1.5 to 3 kilograms. And the next part of the video is for those who, so to say, don't just pass by, but who are seriously interested and want to get the understanding of RAS design. I had originally prepared this content for my company staff to educate them, but I thought why not share it with you? So here we go. System design, basic nuances. Sure, this is not everything. Here are some basic tips to help you design the RAS system correctly. And of course, we start with the calculation of water exchange. Water exchange in RAS for sturgeons should be one full exchange per 30-60 minutes. What does that mean? It means that the water in the tanks should be changed at least once an hour, but no more than 2 times an hour. Why is that so? It's very simple. It's based on the calculations for carbon dioxide, for oxygen, ammonia and nitrogen, suspended solids. I will not dwell on that now. We will cover this topic in my separate video dedicated to water exchange. If you are interested in understanding it in detail, be sure to watch the video. Drum filter. Well, the recommended size of the drum filter mesh at a RAS farm for growing sturgeon is 40 microns, but it's for fry department. For grow-out fish, it is surely more, 60 microns. Of course, there are options and variations, as someone may say, no, you need to use 40 microns mesh in all the farm departments. Another will say the opposite, that this mesh is too small. But I'll tell you honestly, according to my experience, at a large number of operating RAS farms, the 40 microns mesh is used for fry, because fry fishes are small, and thus are better held by the mesh, and 60 microns for grow-out fish. Why? Because of a large amount of suspended solids. If you use a 40 microns mesh, it will soon get clogged, so you need a really big drum filter. And that's optimal for a sturgeon RAS farm with a temperature of 22-24 degrees Celsius inside. 1 square meter of biofilm, or in other words, 1 square meter of media protected surface area treats about half a gram of ammonium nitrogen per day. How to convert ammonium nitrogen into feed, I will talk about it in a separate video. It will definitely come out and you will get the details. What kind of equipment would I recommend for a sturgeon RAS farm? Well, I have already told you about the tanks, what size and depth they should be. So now the primary issue is water treatment units. The first is a drum filter. The second is a moving bed biofilter. I will honestly say that I am advocate of the moving bed biofilter because it's very stable, easy to operate, and it also provides water degassing, and I am convinced that it has a serious advantage compared to other biofilter types. Next is a fixed bed biofilter. Why do I also recommend this biofilter? In addition to biological filtration, it's very good at retaining fine suspended solids, which are not retained by the drum filter mesh. All suspended matter, following with the water current top-down through static media, is retained on the media, so you actually have another step of mechanical treatment, and on the whole the water in the systems becomes better treated. Next is the oxygenator. There are many variations and options. I prefer either classic pressure counts or low pressure counts, like jets, which at lower pumps pressure also oxygenate the water while saving electricity. Pumps. To my mind, centrifugal pumps are better. I'm not so much in favor of submersible pumps. Why not? As a rule, they have a narrower model range, which means you won't find as wide a range as that of centrifugal pumps. They're generally more expensive and also consume more electrical power. I have never come across a good range of high-quality submersible pumps yet, for the flow of 300 and up to 500 cubic meters per hour. That's why I prefer centrifugal pumps with a pressure of half a bar to 1.5 bar, depending on the percentage of oxygen saturation that you need. Disinfection. Well, as a minimum, this could be an ultraviolet disinfection unit, but I would still recommend to install the ozonation system. Of course, the opponents of ozone will now object and say that it's bad, it's dangerous, expensive, and so on. But firstly, ozone provides more effective disinfection, which is difficult to achieve with ultraviolet separately. Secondly, it clarifies water. That is, it coagulates the fine sediment contained in the water, enlarging it, so that later it can safely be removed from the water by the mechanical filters. It kills geosmins, and generally speaking, it conditions the water. Water purified with ultraviolet is very different from the treated with ozone, and you can compare it. So in general, I advocate for using ozone, and if you select the ozonation designed for RAS, it will not cost more than ultraviolet disinfection unit. Just about the same, well, at most there will be a 10–20% difference in my region. As for the additional units, such as a heat exchanger, I still recommend to have automatic water heating, not only for the makeup water, but also in RAS itself. Also, I would recommend a water parameter monitoring system that can automatically read oxygen, temperature, carbon dioxide, and some other indicators. Automatic feeders, which means you won't have to feed the fish manually, you can do it automatically instead. The automatic pH adjustment system, which is the system that adds either acid or alkali to the RAS system in case your pH deviates from the normal parameter. Ensure a source of pure oxygen. You need to get oxygen from somewhere to dissolve it in the mixing unit, which is the oxygenator. Where do you get it from? It can be an oxygen concentrator, an oxygenator. Those can be containers with liquefied oxygen. You can use any source. The most important thing is that you can supply oxygen of at least 90% purity. And by the way, at the pressure of at least 1 bar, in case you have pressure oxygenators. Well, today we have taken a closer look at the basic principles of designing RAS for sturgeon species, as well as their difference from other fish species. Of course, that's far from being all. There is a number of other nuances and peculiarities. We cannot fit them all into one video. So, I hope you enjoyed it and that you found it useful. If so, press the like button and subscribe to my channel. This is Anton Pelcher and my channel on how to grow fish and earn good money from it. Bye!